Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Welcome to the podcast today. I hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. Hope you spent lots of time with your family and with your loved ones. Well, it is an exciting day in the world of news, and that is because, as you probably know, it is Joe Biden's last day in office, and it is Donald Trump's first day. He is being sworn in as president as we speak, as I am recording this, and everyone around the world is watching with anticipation, with concern, especially us up here in Canada, worried about the impact of a Trump presidency. But before we get into all of that, and we will, I think it's important to just sort of stop and appreciate the moment that we're living in. We witnessed something truly remarkable with Trump coming back. So many people thought that he was just completely unelectable, that it would never happen again after all of the events that happened, especially in and around January 6th, 2021, which I always thought was very much blown out of proportion. But the way he acted was not presidential at moments. And I don't think anyone would have guessed that we would be back here seeing him sworn in as president. There's always a lot of pomp when it comes to the American traditions and the way that they celebrate their democracy. And I think today it's just kind of fun to watch, whether you're American or not, whether you love Trump or hate him. The pageantry is always something. And so it's fun to watch the inauguration. And so, talking about Trump, the question that everyone is dying to know is, will Trump bring in the economy crippling tariffs that he has threatened? Well, the answer is that no, not on day one, as he previously pledged. He had said that it was going to be one of his initial executive orders. That has not happened yet. That did not happen. So Justin Trudeau may have dodged a bullet, but the war, of course, is far from over. We'll talk about all of that. We're also going to talk about the lawsuit by the JCCF, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, to try to get Parliament back in session, to try to force our own transfer of power, our own election up here in Canada. So we'll give you an update on that. Before we get to any of that, I want to give you the latest news when it comes to the Liberal leadership race. So what's going to happen? Who is going to replace Justin Trudeau as the leader of the Liberal Party and therefore will become our next prime minister, whether we like it or not? Well, Chrystia Freeland, Trudeau's sort of right-hand man, his deputy prime minister, finance minister. Before that, she was a foreign affairs minister. Chrystia Freeland officially launched her campaign in Toronto on Sunday. And I'm sorry to say, but Chrystia Freeland, it was a disaster. It was a disaster. I guess we could have predicted that because pretty much everything that this woman touches becomes a disaster. She's a bit of a hot mess over there, almost to the point where you feel bad for her. Almost, not quite, but almost feel bad for her. So this is what happened shortly after taking the podium. Chrystia Freeland's speech was interrupted by a group of, you guessed it, pro-Palestinian protesters. Let's play that clip.
In my office in Ottawa, I have a beautiful painting of a Canadian flag made by kids.
Unbelievable. I don't understand. I mean, this woman was the deputy prime minister of Canada. Presumably, she has a team, she has some staff, she has security. How is it that when Mark Carney introduced his intentions to run as leader of this party, they wouldn't even let journalists into the room? That's how tight the security was. That's how closely things were vetted. They literally did not let journalists into the room unless you worked for a government media company, as our own Isaac Lamoureux learned. Cian Bexty and many others, including journalists from the Western Standard, were not allowed into the room because security was so tight. And here we have Chrystia Freeland. Somehow they didn't catch the people standing right behind her with a giant banner. I mean, can we show this banner? It says Freeland, our deputy PM gravedigger. Like, how on earth do you get a banner of that size into the room? You could tell the room isn't very packed. There's not that many people at this event. It was a pretty small, pretty sad event. And yet somehow they managed to have that huge banner rolled up in someone's pocket or hidden inside someone's jacket and actually were able to unscroll it and put it up behind Chrystia Freeland. You saw it at the very end of that clip that I played, that she didn't realize that, someone was in her face. They took that person away, and she didn't realize that there was more. There was a group of them, and that someone was behind her holding that sign. What a terrible, terrible look. And again, it's kind of ironic because these protesters are of the left. They're part of her coalition. I think that the Liberals have been completely cynical about Canada's immigration plan. They've even let in Gazan refugees, for goodness sake. The countries around Gaza don't want Gazan refugees because of the trouble that they can bring. And yet Canada, with open arms, is allowing them to come in and giving them welfare checks when they get here. These people should be supporting the Liberals, you would think. But the reality is that no one is ever far extreme enough for these activists, and they're going to keep pushing and pushing. And so they really just created a mockery of Chrystia Freeland. The fact that they had that photo behind here. Our friends over at Canada Proud pointed out something interesting about these protesters, which is just that they've been harassing Canadians with zero consequences for a year and a half. But when they annoy Chrystia Freeland, 10 seconds later, the response is different. They get booted out of the room. And again, just having that banner back there, again, amateur hour, bad start to a bad campaign. Couldn't have happened to a worse person. Chrystia Freeland, it didn't get much better from here, folks. She's just not a very capable politician. She's not very polished, not at all like Mark Carney. Here she is. This is a funny ex-user that I like to follow called Ryan Garrison. He has great content. He posts this video of her saying, "This is Chrystia Freeland's Kamala Harris moment. You have no idea what to say, so you just repeat it and pretend no one notices." Okay, let's play this clip.
You're ready to fight, aren't you? I can feel it. That is so great. That is so, so great. We are ready to fight, aren't we? Yeah. And so, with your help, we are going to fight.
I don't know if her teleprompter froze there or something like that, but she says, "We're so ready to fight, and we're just going to fight, and we're ready to fight. Fight, 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 fight." Okay, there. Kind of some, you could see some overlap between her and Kamala Harris, even just with the situation that Trudeau realizes that there's no chance that he can win the election. So he dumps it onto his sort of number two, and she's just wildly unprepared as a candidate and not a very inspiring person. You could totally see it happening. Again, okay, let's go to this. Stephen Taylor, political commentator, he pointed this out. Not a lot of interest in Chrystia Freeland. Not a lot of interest. So during her speech, during her big announcement that she'd been teasing for weeks and weeks and weeks, she only had 98 viewers. Yes, only 98 people were watching the stream as it was happening. So not a lot of people in the room, not a lot of people online, not a great start. Well, don't worry, not to fear. Chrystia Freeland does have one big fan in her corner fighting for her, and that is none other than the Globe and Mail's Andrew Coyne. So Andrew Coyne, of course, praised Chrystia Freeland. Here is his tweet on the matter. He said that she really captured the public mood better than Mark Carney. So Andrew Coyne is giving nothing but flattery to Chrystia Freeland. I guess he knows where his bread is buttered, and he's just praising her campaign video that she released, which really not a lot to compliment in this video. But I'll play it for you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Here's the video.
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Donald Trump doesn't like me very much.
Canada. We don't like their representative very much.
I'm a tough negotiator. During the first Trump administration, I fought hard to protect Canadian jobs, the Canadian economy, and our way of life. And we won. I left Trudeau's cabinet because I know what we need to do to win that fight again. Donald Trump and his billionaire buddies think they can push us around. Trump thinks we're for sale, but he can take what isn't his. I'm not gonna let him. We're a proud country. The true north, strong and free. A country of smart, caring, and hardworking people. A country that gets big things done. A country worth fighting for. But Pierre Poilievre, he'll bow down to Trump and sell us out. This moment matters for all of us. I'm running to be leader of the Liberal Party and our next Prime Minister. I'm in this to fight for you, to fight for Canadians, to fight for Canada. Join me. Join the fight.
I think she said the word fight about 80 times in that video. She just kept repeating the word fight, 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 fight. Okay, a couple things to pick up on that video there. She talks about how Trump has his billionaire buddies. I'm sorry, that's a bit rich coming from Chrystia Freeland. She wrote a book that sort of helped launch her career called Plutocrats. And during her time profiling the richest, most powerful people in the world, she buddied up with them and became friends with a bunch of them, most notably, of course, George Soros. So here, Melissa Rogers had this tweet saying Chrystia Freeland started working with George Soros in 1990. Together, they worked to manipulate Ukrainian politics. Soros also funded the Ukrainian legal reform, which Chrystia Freeland's mother led. They will do whatever it takes for Ukraine to flourish. This is the mandate, not Canada. I pointed this out in some of my investigative writing when Chrystia Freeland first sort of surfaced and when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, that it's so weird. I mean, Chrystia Freeland described herself as a Ukrainian national. That's how she described herself. She's a nationalist. She's a nationalist for Ukraine, not for Canada. She probably thinks being a nationalist in Canada means that you're a racist, and yet she herself described herself that way. So, very close friends, friendship, admiration for George Soros, and yet somehow she's accusing Trump and Pierre Poilievre of being the ones with billionaires. And her whole entire pitch to Canadians in that video was that Donald Trump hates her, was that she would do a better job negotiating with Donald Trump because Trump doesn't like her. I'm sorry, that is not a good pitch to Canadians. Regardless of what Andrew Coyne thinks, Andrew Coyne is wrong on this issue, just like he's wrong on a lot of things. Having the incoming prime minister or incoming president who's threatening tariffs against your country hate you is not going to help our country. We need someone who can go down and speak to Trump, who speaks his language. We need like a Trump whisperer at this moment in time. And so if your whole pitch is that Trump doesn't like you, I'm sorry, I don't want you negotiating on my behalf. I don't want you there. You're not a good person to lead our country if the person who you're negotiating with hates you, especially someone like Trump who can be a bit erratic. We don't want him holding an irrational grudge against you and taking it out on our entire country. And again, falling back on her negotiating NAFTA, again, I'm sorry, but that was embarrassing. Chrystia Freeland representing us, that was back when she was Minister of Trade. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. First, she showed up with these weird T-shirts that she made. She went down to Washington. She was wearing this weird T-shirt that said, "Keep calm and negotiate NAFTA." I'm sorry, but what kind of grown adult woman wears a T-shirt, like a graphic tee? This is something you do in high school, or maybe like if you're a member of a sorority, you wear like cute matching T-shirts. But you're the representative of Canada going down to negotiate, and you show up in like a crappy homemade T-shirt in your professional capacity. That was just incredibly bad, incredibly embarrassing. I wrote about this at the time. I was writing in the Toronto Sun. So I had an article that was talking about how she gave a deranged speech. I'm sorry. She was given this really ridiculous award by Foreign Policy magazine, Diplomat of the Year. And she gives a speech just ripping into Trump and talking about the New World Order and how it has to like deal with dictators and authoritarians, obviously talking about Trump. The other side, the Americans took note of that. They saw that she was out there bashing them, bashing the Americans, and they didn't like it. They didn't like it very much. Here she is again out there. This clip sticks in my mind of how kind of cringe she is. So here she was talking about how trade negotiations are kind of like going into labor and having contractions and having a baby. Here's this clip.
It's never over until it's over. When I was giving birth, one of my midwives said, "You never know how long the labor will be, but you know that each contraction is one contraction closer to the baby being born." And if I could use such a personal metaphor, that seems to apply to trade negotiations.
I'm sorry, that is just wildly inappropriate. Like, I say this as a mother of four and someone who actually my last child was born at home, not in a hospital, not with any medication. I, Hearing her in a professional setting talking to reporters, she was down in Washington talking to the press, the American press and the Canadian press, and talking about giving birth and having contractions and working with a midwife. It is just weird. It's inappropriate. It makes everybody stop. Instead of thinking about the trade, the political situation on the ground, they're now picturing you going through labor. I mean, I get that Trudeau is a feminist and he likes having women in his cabinet and he likes putting women out there. And they probably told Chrystia Freeland to play up the fact that she's a woman because it makes liberals like Trudeau better that he has a woman in a high position there negotiating on behalf of Canada. But you probably shouldn't talk about that kind of stuff in a press conference in front of the press when you're trying to talk about trade. It's just not right. It's inappropriate. It's weird. It's cringe. That's what we're going to have to expect from Chrystia Freeland. And again, I mean, let me know what you think. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think the pitch that Trump doesn't like you is kind of disqualifying in this moment of politics, when we need a representative to go down there and speak to Trump and negotiate a deal and save our country from economy crippling tariffs. Having someone that he hates, I just don't think it's a good idea. Now, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't think so. I don't think that Chrystia Freeland is the right person. Even the Liberals know that. Even their own audience isn't really interested. Not a lot of people at her launch. The few people that were there, some of them were protesting. Not a lot of people watching online. Not a lot of hope there. Let's give you an update on the other candidate who is running. That, of course, is Mark Carney. Part of his big pitch is that he is this global elite who has had a lot of positions of power. Well, that might not necessarily help him. Here we had the former UK Prime Minister, Liz Truss, warning Canadians, basically pleading with Canadians not to go with this guy. She writes, after printing too much money at the Bank of England, promoting disastrous net zero policies, and backing the Labour MP Rachel Reeves, who was a far left globalist, pro lockdown, pro vaccine, pro everything, growth killing economic plans, it seems like Mark Carney wants to inflict these terrible ideas on Canada. Resist, Canadians, resist. So, speaking from the Prime Minister who worked with the guy, resist, do not go for this guy, says former PM Liz Truss of the UK. I noticed this as well, again, from Melissa Rogers. I showed another one of her tweets. She posted this on X over the weekend, just saying, to understand Mark Carney, look at the 15 people that he follows on Instagram. He only follows 15 people, and it's pretty illuminating as to who it is that he's interested in, who he gets influenced by. Of course, Gavin Newsom, who has been just absolutely disastrous when it comes to dealing with those LA fires. Who else do we have on this list? Justin Trudeau, of course, the Liberal Party, of course, but also another sort of left-wing authoritarian there, Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who was absolutely disastrous, maybe one of the few countries in the world that was even stricter and more harsh against people who didn't want to take the shot. And that was New Zealand, as well as, of course, Gerald Butts, who is reportedly working on his campaign, and the radical environmentalist Stephen Guilbeault. So, yeah, I think we're going to have to expect much of the same from Mark Carney as what we have got from Justin Trudeau. And much like Trudeau, Mark Carney doesn't seem to like the press that much, doesn't seem to want any independent voices to cover his work, doesn't seem to have a lot of time for hearing the other side of the story, and doesn't have much regard for the truth as well. So here we have Liberal MP George Chahal, the one who hosted Mark Carney's event, his announcement last week that he was running. And here he is on the news telling the Canadian public that all local journalists had access to the event. That, of course, is not true, but the truth doesn't really matter around here. So let's play that clip.
It's not as though this happened overnight. There's been lots of speculation that Mr. Carney would run. He couldn't even answer the most basic question, which was, will you not pursue a consumer price on carbon? He said, he sort of alluded to the idea that there could be other things, but that would have to replace it. But he wouldn't be specific. Isn't that problematic?
Well, no, I think he clearly stated what his plan will be moving forward. In the days and weeks ahead, he will be outlining his ideas and his plan for Canada. And I think that's important that to launch today, we've seen that all the local journalists had the opportunity to ask him a number of questions. But a lot of our constituents here in Edmonton got an opportunity to meet him and ask him those questions as well.
So no, it's not true. All local journalists were not admitted because, again, True North's local journalist, Isaac Lamoureux, was not allowed in the building. So not telling the truth there, George, not telling the truth there, Mark. Carney, okay, who else do we have in the race? Karina Gould also made her announcement over the weekend that she would also be joining the campaign. Now, I wouldn't say that her event was as disastrous as Chrystia Freeland, but I can't say it went very well either. At her own campaign launch speech, she just let the cat right out of the bag and said that Canadians don't trust the Liberals. Canadians have lost trust in our party. Let's play that clip.
And I'll be very honest with you, Rosie, Canadians don't trust the Liberal Party of Canada right now. And I think that's because over the past couple of years in particular, we've gotten further away from the grassroots and talking about the things that Canadians care about.
Oops, wrong clip there. Well, that was her later that day telling Rosemary Barton that Canadians have lost trust in the Liberal Party. She said pretty much the same thing at her launch campaign. So let's play the clip of her at her launch saying that Canadians have lost trust in her party.
We have a big challenge ahead of us. Canadians have lost trust in our party. And if we are going to be able to keep building our country, we must rebuild our party. Liberal at the age of 14 because I believe in Canada. I believe in who we are as a people. I believe in the promise that we represent for the entire world. The Liberal Party of Canada is not a hobby for me. It's not a side project. It is something that I have been working for my entire life, like so many of you in this room and Liberal Party members across the country.
So she's speaking some truth there. I'll give it to her for that. That's kind of speech that you give after you've lost an election, right? That's the kind of thing that you say after your party has been obliterated in an election, and you say, "Okay, let's have some hard truths, some hard conversations. This is why we lost. Let's rebuild our party. It's time to rebuild our party." It's a little bit awkward to say that when your party is still in power. And when you're running to try to lead that party. I know those clips. I can just wait. I know that those are going to end up in conservative attack ads because having a Liberal frontrunner say the truth, let it out of the bag, that's saying that Canadians don't trust us, nobody likes the Liberals anymore, we have to rebuild our party, that's not going to help them. It's true, it's entirely true, but not going to help them. Okay, I want to get to the big news of the day, which is that Donald Trump is being inaugurated. And I think it's a good time to pause. Look, first of all, I'll just say that this is a Canadian show. This is a Canadian podcast. True North is a Canadian news outlet. And the thing that we'd like to do is focus on Canada, talk about the things that matter in our country. If you want to get the American news, and you can, there's so many great podcasts. I know that you'll probably be over there listening to the guys at the Daily Wire or Megyn Kelly or one of the very many great sources of news down in the States to hear what's happening down there. And I'm not going to try to provide any special insight on Donald Trump. But I do think it's important that we pause and sort of recognize just how disastrous Joe Biden was for the United States and by virtue of that, the entire world. Because what happens in the United States is so consequential around the world. Having a weak president down there hurts everybody. And there was a Twitter thread that I saw, which was Joe Biden's disastrous presidency in 25 photos. And so I want to kind of walk us through just how bad it is, partially because look, a lot of this stuff was happening in Canada. A lot of this stuff. There's a lot of overlap between Trudeau and Biden, and that is why it's important to walk us through it. So let's go through this thread. So the author on Twitter here is a gentleman called Ben Q, and he says Joe Biden's disastrous presidency in 25 photos. Here's 25 photos that show the story of the Biden years. So the first one here is just a flashback to the socially distanced cabinet. Just remember this. Remember that this happened. This was our lifetime. This wasn't that long ago. This was part of Joe Biden's legacy. Here they are with their ridiculous masks on, with their chairs exactly 6 feet apart. Remember that. Keep 3 meters apart. That's science. Trust the science. And that is just incredibly ingrained as part of his legacy, part of the embarrassment of his time in office. Okay, let's move on to the second one here, which is just gas prices. Gas prices rose massively in 2021. Of course, because of high inflation that came from huge increases in government spending and the printing of money. The government spending went to basically just pay everyone to keep the economy going, while their disastrous policies had shut it down. And again, exactly the same thing. Number one and number two, exactly the same thing were happening under Justin Trudeau. Of course, our gas is in liters, theirs is in gallons, but tells the exact same story. I could be saying the same thing about Justin Trudeau. Okay, the next picture here, heading north. This says Guatemalan authorities were pushing back on the migrant caravan. Nearly, this is what would happen. These individuals are just pushing their way into the United States and having an open border, completely unguarded border. You don't have a country anymore. If you don't have a border, you don't have sovereignty. If you don't have control over your territory, you can't be a country. And it is just unbelievable. Both Trudeau and Biden just fully embrace the policy of letting whoever wants to come in, come in. Like all of these young military-aged men, welcome into the country. No worries. Everyone can come, collect your welfare, collect your benefits, and we're going to be one happy shining happy family. A big post-national state here happened in the United States, happened in Canada. Here's one thing that didn't happen in Canada. We didn't have a kind of declining, cognitively impaired leader. Here's Joe Biden, sadly, showing his age, where he couldn't walk up the stairs of Air Force One, failing to make it up the stairs. I mean, look, we got our own problems with Justin Trudeau. Fortunately, being in the decline in terms of his age and ability is not one of them. Although I'm sure some in the comments will probably point out the fact that there's other types of declines happening with Justin Trudeau. Next photo here is the Afghanistan withdrawal. I think this moment really, I mean, it was horrifying to watch, horrifying to see how it all unfolded, and it really changed the world. Because seeing how weak the Americans were, seeing how absolutely chaotic and disorganized this was, the idea that they would just leave and leave so many people behind, leave so much resources behind, military, everything. It just showed the absolute weakness of Joe Biden, the fact that he was willing to do all that without a plan. It just seemed completely ham-fisted. And again, it showed the world that now's the time. Now's the time. We have a weak president, a sleepy old man in office, never should have been elected. A lot of really questionable things happened around that 2020 election that allowed for this man to become president. And now's your chance. If you're any kind of, adversarial state looking to get the upper hand in terms of regional stability or regional hegemony, now's your chance. And you can draw a direct line from that Afghan withdrawal to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to Hamas's war against Israel. When the United States is weak, the world is unstable. And we definitely saw that. Okay, let's skip ahead here to another photo of Joe Biden with the vaccines, the vaccine mandate. Much like in Canada, the United States introduced a vaccine mandate via executive order, wasn't voted in, it didn't come from Congress, it came from Biden. And it was later ruled unconstitutional because in the United States, their constitution is actually something that's binding, that is upheld by the courts over there, unlike in Canada, where, again, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms did nothing to protect us from a tyrannical government during COVID. I mean, what is the Constitution even worth the paper it's written on if it can't protect you? One of the very first things in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom is the right to freedom of religion. And yet churches were closed, right? We were supposed to have freedom of mobility in our charter. And yet the government prevented you from basically leaving your house in many circumstances. You couldn't get on a plane, couldn't get on a train, couldn't get on a bus if you didn't have the jab. And again, really, really, really unbelievable what happened with regards to governments just out of control. Okay, let's move on to the next one here, as I alluded to with the Afghan withdrawal. Putin goes rogue and invades Ukraine, turns into a horrific war, one of the most devastating wars of the 21st century. A million people or more have been killed, and billions and billions and billions of dollars have gone to further that war, to fund the war effort, to continue the fighting and the misery in Ukraine. That's definitely part of Joe Biden's legacy. Next, we have Joe Biden's Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, famously saying that she is not a biologist because she was asked to define a woman. And according to this brilliant legal scholar, you can't define what a woman is unless you're a biologist. And she is not a biologist, therefore, she does not have to answer the question. And no, she cannot define what a woman is. I think that is just a photo that we will remember and think of when we think of Joe Biden and his time in office. Speaking of that, I'm going to pull up a tweet that I saw when it comes to this issue, because I believe one of the first things that Donald Trump did do was an executive order plainly stating that men are men, women are women. Behold, this is from Megyn Kelly's X. It says the executive order written by Trump, issued on the first day here, is a government-wide, establishes government-wide that biological reality of two sexes is clearly male and female. All radical gender ideology, guidance, communication policies are to be removed. Agencies will cease pretending that men can be women and that women can be men when enforcing laws to protect against sexual discrimination. Woman means an adult human female. The executive order directs that government identification like passports and personnel records will reflect biological reality and not self-assessed gender identity. Wow. So big change there down in the United States. I hope that means that Canada will be next. I hope that Canada will go down the same path. Okay, let's go to the next photo here. Sean, the freak show. The freak show. This is back to Joe Biden's legacy, the 25 pictures that defined his presidency. Here we have the non-binary deputy secretary of Sam Brinton, and his transgender assistant secretary of health, Rachel Levine, pose for photos. So yes, these are actually officials in the Biden administration. Very confused men pretending to be women there. Definitely part of his legacy. Next, we'll move on to the fentanyl crisis. And again, this is part of Canada's legacy as well. This photo depicts homeless encampments continue to expand across the United States and most cities, notably in California. Many of the homeless are addicts hooked on fentanyl smuggled in by Mexican drug cartels, and much of it made in China. That's, again, could say the same thing about Justin Trudeau, could say the same thing about Canada. Okay, let's move on to the political persecution. This is about January 6ers. Images from inside a federal prison show how Biden regime is torturing January 6 protesters through the use of prolonged solitary confinement. Meanwhile, hundreds more are convicted on long sentences for the so-called insurrection. Absolutely unconscionable treatment over there. And again, some similar overlaps. I know that the media tried to portray Canada's Freedom Convoy as our version of January 6th. They lied and said it was an insurrection. They went out of their way to use undue force, really just a stain on Justin Trudeau's time in office. Same thing happened down in the United States. But then things started to turn around. Biden used lawfare against Donald Trump. It was kind of funny, right? During the campaign, you heard a lot in the US about how Donald Trump was going to use the government, use the power of the government against his political enemies, that he was going to lock people up. And then, of course, the irony is that was literally what the Biden regime was doing against Donald Trump. So Biden regime moves forward with the prosecution of his political adversary and the leader of the other party, Donald Trump, who was leading at the time in the polls for the Republican nomination, on phony charges. Well, it all backfired, right? Because after this photo was taken, after the raid on Mar-a-Lago, after this photo was taken, that was when Trump was back. That put Trump back. So many Republicans who were sort of lukewarm on him, unsure about him, didn't really know if they wanted to go for him. They were all in after this. It's like once you declare war against our guy, it just makes you double down and want him even more. And so this was sort of part of the turning point. A couple more photos here. Which one do we have next here, Sean? We've got Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden, oh Hunter, arrives at court ahead of his trial on tax fraud and illegal immigration charges. Of course, he would later be pardoned by his father, despite repeated promises by old Joe that he would not do that. But of course, he did. Next, we have, what do we have next here, Sean? The debate. This will sort of go down in infamy as the worst performance ever by a debater. I don't think it's ever happened that someone has performed so badly in a presidential debate that they've literally had to drop out. But that's what happened in this campaign, 2024. The debate effectively ended his candidacy for president. Biden showed himself to be every bit as demented as his critics had warned. Very sad, but very true, and we all saw it. And then they plopped in a replacement candidate here, Kamala Harris, bringing back the joy. What an absolute disaster these two were. Wow. Kamala Harris takes over as the Democratic nominee and chooses Tim Walz as a running mate with the promise of restoring joy to politics. The campaign turns out to be a catastrophic failure. You could see it happening with Chrystia Freeland. You could see the parallels. And then, of course, Donald Trump wins with the greatest political comeback ever. And that brings us to today, where he is being sworn in as the 47th president, the greatest comeback in political history. I think that's exactly right. Trump posted this video on his Truth Social, and I want to go ahead and play it for you because it's really remarkable what has happened in the United States. So here's that clip.
Message to hold in your hearts today, it's this: never, ever give up.
FBI raid at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence.
Deadly force being authorized.
Nothing worth doing ever, ever, ever came easy.
Donald J. Trump has been indicted.
Jack Smith has again indicted former President Trump.
Over the course of your life, you will find that things are not always fair. You will find that things happen to you that you do not deserve. Like they said, take a look at what happened. But you have to put your head down and fight. Never, ever, ever give up. The more people tell you it's not possible, that it can't be done, the more you should be absolutely determined to prove them wrong.
CNN projects that Donald Trump has been elected president.
Treat the word impossible as nothing more than motivation. Relish the opportunity to be an outsider, because it's the outsiders who change the world. 250 million Americans are not garbage. And it'll make a real and lasting difference. The more that a broken system tells you that you're wrong, the more certain you should be that you must keep pushing ahead. You must keep pushing forward.
I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
So just remember that. Never stop fighting for what you believe in and for the people who care about you. America is beginning a new chapter. Our best days are yet to come. I can promise you that.
What an incredible message. What an incredible leader. And I know that most Canadians don't like Donald Trump. Most Canadians don't, they tell pollsters anyway that they would not vote for Trump, that they would have voted for Kamala Harris, even many conservatives, which is tough to understand. But you could see just the difference in style, right? The Americans are so much more brash, so much more in your face. Their patriotism is just so much more out in the open. Many Canadians find that distasteful. I personally find it inspiring. I love that about Americans. I love the fact that there's this new resurgence in in patriotism, in love of country, in this, even just the whole like USA, USA, USA chants that break out. I remember those from like the 90s, and then they kind of seem to disappear for a couple decades, and now they're back. And seeing sort of the excitement, the optimism for the future, the idea that America is going to go through another golden age, just the idea that the best days of their country lie ahead and are not behind. And it's genuine. When you hear it, you think, yes, that's possible. Yes, it's true. And it's so exciting. When you hear it about Canada, I mean, you don't really hear any of that stuff about Canada. And it's tough to even get in the headspace where you would feel optimistic for your country and for your future like that, like you see down in the United States. And that's why I've been talking about this on the podcast, that I think Canadians should get on board. They should get on board. Trump is doing something amazing in the United States. Whether you like him or whether you hate him, you can't deny the fact that he is a consequential person, the fact that it was the hand of Providence that saved that man's life when he was being the assassination attempt, the fact that the bullet missed his head by mere millimeters and he turned his head at that exact moment. I mean, what an unbelievable thing to have happened. And I think that with that energy and excitement, like Canada needs to be involved. Canada needs to somehow strike a deal. I'm not saying that we should be absorbed or annexed or become American, but I'm saying that why wouldn't we want to try to get in on that, try to emulate that, try to bring back our own patriotism and our own excitement for the future, unleash the free market and have our own economic heyday. I think that's what I want. I don't know if that's what many Canadians want, but that's what I want. And if Trudeau was smart, well, first of all, if Trudeau was smart, he would just call an election and allow for a new government to go down there and negotiate with Trump. But instead, he is sending down his own motley crew of characters down to be part of this new Canada-US Relations Council. So here is True North reporting that Jean Charest, who, remember, he ran for leadership of the Conservative Party. Well, it turns out he's back on Team Liberal again, former Liberal Premier of Quebec, along with Rachel Notley and many others. They're the ones going down. They're the ones going down to represent us. So Trudeau found a crew of left-wing liberals to go down there and try to talk to Trump's team. That's just not going to work. It's not going to go over very well. If he had some sense, he would find the people who already have the connections with the incoming administration. People like Jamil Javani. Jamil Javani is a member of parliament on Pierre Poilievre's team. He represents a riding just outside of Toronto. And Jamil actually has a personal connection to the Trump administration. He went to law school with J.D. Vance, and they've been great friends and good buddies for the last 15 years. Here is a picture of Jamil Javani with his friend, his close personal friend, J.D. Vance. It's incredible. And Jamil Javani is down there for the inauguration right now. Why wouldn't you put Jamil on that council and get him as part of the negotiations? Reach across the aisle and put a conservative out there. That's who is going to speak the same language as Donald Trump. You also had Danielle Smith down there. Justin Trudeau is picking fights and trying to make enemies of Danielle, but Danielle is actually the premier has negotiated and she's made inroads. Here she is at a looks like a black tie event down in Washington, D.C. the other night. And she says, honored to see my good friend, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, who is the nominee for the U.S. Interior Secretary and head of the Energy Council, as well as Chris White, nominee for U.S. Energy Secretary, wishing them both all the very best as they go through their confirmation hearings and look forward to working with them to secure North American energy dominance. Again, why wouldn't you include someone like Danielle Smith, who actually has the friends, who's down there working the room, making friends, posting about it, trying to make those inroads? Why would you send her top political adversary, Rachel Notley? That makes no sense. It makes no sense to have Rachel Notley down there rather than Danielle Smith. Who else is in Washington? Well, none other than Keean Bexte of the Counter Signal. Man, this guy's got an uncanny ability to just find politicians. Here he is with Ted Cruz down in Washington. You'll remember Keean Bexte tracked Justin Trudeau down when he was hiding from the press, hiding from reporters. Keean somehow found a way to find Justin Trudeau on a beach on Vancouver Island. He did something similar when he found Greta Thunberg when she was in Canada. Keean's just incredible journalist. So check him out down at the Counter Signal. He's going to be reporting everything that's going on down in DC during the inauguration. Well, we did get some good news, folks. We did get some good news, and that is that there are no tariffs coming in yet. So this is Paul Vieira of the Wall Street Journal, who is reporting that despite the fact that Trump said that on day one he was going to issue an executive order including a 25% tariff on Canada, he writes this: President-elect Donald Trump is planning to issue a broad memorandum Monday that directs federal agencies to study trade policies and evaluate U.S. trade relationships with China and America's continental neighbors, but stops short of imposing new tariffs on his first day in office. So this is a win. This is a win. Trudeau dodged a bullet. I don't think it is because of his council there. I don't think it is because of his cabinet who are down there trying to win over their American counterparts. I think it is probably more to do with the advocacy work of people like Danielle Smith, perhaps Jamil Javani as well. But so far, no tariffs, just a report studying it, which means that there's going to be some sort of sober second thought before any rash tariffs come in, which is very, very good news. BlackBerry co-founder Jim Basile, he warned Canada that we are sleepwalking into a Trump tariff crisis. And I think it's just incredibly important to put the right people in place. It is incredibly important, which is why we need an election. We need to have an election. We need to get the House back in session, and we need to have an election. So I want to give a quick update on that, because the JCCF, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, as you know, we reported on this earlier on a previous episode about how they are trying to force Parliament back in. They say that Trudeau's effort to prorogue Parliament was actually unconstitutional. Well, an update on Saturday, they announced that a federal court had granted an expedited hearing on the case, and the decision to prorogue Parliament. Chief Justice Crampton cited the matter's urgency, the risk of mootness under standard timelines, and the public interest in resolving the issue promptly. And so because of all this, we learned that the new hearing will take place in Ottawa on February 13th and 14th. Now, I know some of you might chuckle at that, because if you think of an expedited hearing, you think about urgency in this matter and how there's quick timelines here and there's public interest. You would think, hey, today is January 20th. If this was such an urgent matter, why aren't we hearing the case today? Why isn't there a federal judge hearing this right now, this trial right now? Well, I guess expedited and quick in Canada means 3 weeks rather than waiting all the way till the end of March, which is what they're asking for, what Trudeau has asked for. So we will continue to report on this. Hopefully, we'll even have a reporter down in Ottawa to report on that case and that trial, because it is incredibly important, and we will bring you more on that when it comes. I think that, really, an election couldn't come fast enough. An election couldn't happen soon enough, just given what we're dealing with, the absolute disaster that is Justin Trudeau, the joke of his cabinet ministers and his U.S. envoy that's down there, his U.S.-Canada Relations Council, being the ones who are going to be representing us. It's not good for Canada, folks. It's not good. As I just said, it's an exciting day in the world. It's an exciting day for our American cousins and neighbors that they are welcoming in this new era. And I think even a lot of people who really didn't like Trump back in 2016, even people who didn't vote for Donald Trump this time around, recognize the excitement of the moment in bringing in a new politician, a new administration that thinks differently, that has different ideas, that isn't completely tied to the status quo and the way that things have been in the past. And there's some excitement in that. I mean, Trump may fail. Trump may not be able to live up to his own expectations and what he wants, but he's willing to take risks and do things differently. And that is exactly what we need in Canada. Things have gone incredibly downhill in Canada. So just thinking about what Canada looked like 10 years ago before Justin Trudeau came into office back in 2015, I saw this Twitter post comparing Canada and what has happened over the last 10 years with Justin Trudeau in office. It says when he took, in 2015, the dollar was at 0.75 US. Today is at 0.69. The national debt was $630 billion back then. It's now 1.3 trillion. The average home cost $450,000. Now it's $725. The average gas price was $1 a liter. Now it's $1.50 a liter. And this is crazy. The price of gold was $1,400 per ounce. And today it is nearly $4,000 per ounce. And not to mention the fact that 25% of Canadians live in poverty. This is according to a Twitter account, an X account called Government is Corrupt. So this is a video from a news report from CTV back in 2024 about the number of Canadians living in poverty. Let's play that clip.
We begin this morning with a concerning new look at how many Canadians are struggling with the rising cost of living. 1 in 4 people living in poverty in this country. Those numbers coming from Food Banks Canada. It found the poverty rate is actually higher than the 10% estimated by Stats Can using metrics out of Europe. The report says 25% of Canadians cannot afford 2 or more household essentials, putting them below the poverty line. That includes 30% of 18 to 30-year-olds, 44% of single-parent families, and 42% of renters.
So I think Canada is at a sort of moment of truth. It's like a fork in the road right now. We have to decide which direction we are going to take as a country. Are we going to continue doing what we've done to get us into this absolute mess? This idea that, I mean, we're basically on the way to Venezuela. Like Canada will be Venezuela in 10 years if we continue down this path. Or can we find a way to force an election to vote in a new party, get a new political mandate, and make some serious, serious changes? I really do hope for the latter. I think Canada doesn't have a lot more time. I don't know that we can survive another 8 or 10 years in an administration like that of the Justin Trudeau government, just how disastrous things have been and how quickly things have fallen apart. Okay, well, we wish all the best to our American friends and neighbors in this exciting day for their country and ushering in a new president. Okay, folks, I want to enough about politics, enough about the world and what's happening over there. I want to bring it back to home now and talk a little bit about myself. I don't usually talk too much about myself and my family on my podcast. I like to be a fairly private person, but I did mention that my husband and I were celebrating our 11th marriage anniversary. We did so over the weekend. It was really good. You know, what happens when you first have kids, you kind of have to readjust like your entire life, and you have to readjust all of your expectations as well. And there can be some resistance. I remember the first time we celebrated our wedding anniversary after we had kids, we still had this mindset, my husband and I, like, let's go away for the weekend. Let's go, like, you know, stay at a hotel. I think we drove like a mile away from our house. We had my mom, grandma staying with our baby at the time. And we went to try to have like a romantic weekend away. I was still nursing the baby, and so it didn't really work out as planned. We were going to go away for 2 days. We ended up spending one night and then waking up early the next morning and going home to be with the baby. And so, the whole idea that you can kind of continue doing your life as you did before kids, it just doesn't really happen. It doesn't really make sense. And I think now, here we are celebrating 11 years. We've come to terms with the fact that our kids dominate our lives, and we don't even try to go away for a weekend. We did manage to get out for a nice lunch together, and that was about as much as you can expect when you have 4 little kids. But I think, I don't like to talk about it all the time, but I think marriage is absolutely the most important institution in Canadian society. I think that if you don't put family at the center of the world and your world and the country, the only thing that can fill that void is government. And so strong families, strong marriages, strong families create strong communities, and strong communities are what can resist against government tyranny. And so again, like, I define myself as being a social conservative, and the way that I define that is simply that I believe that families and marriage is the most important institution, and that families are the central institution in society not government. Again, families create communities, churches create communities, and strong communities are what stop tyrannical forces in government. I'm actually proud to announce that I contributed an essay to a new book on marriage. The book is called I Do, Why Marriage Still Matters, written by Andrea Mrozik and Peter John Mitchell, who work for the Cardis Institute. This is an initiative of Cardis. And it was just an absolute pleasure working with these folks. An incredible book. I got to read it before it was published. And again, I have an essay in there talking about my own personal views on marriage and my own situation. I'm going to read a little bit from the synopsis here because I think it's just so important and it's worth reading. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy of this book. It says, "For many today, marriage is a nice thing, but not necessary. I Do is a book to help you reconsider the central importance of marriage, not simply for the couples involved, but for all of us. Plenty of research suggests that a good marriage encourages health, wellness, and happiness, and the goodness of marriage extends into our communities." To this, the retort comes quickly. Well, that's the result of good marriages. Yet, instead of nurturing good marriages, we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Marriage is not the solution to every problem. It remains, however, an ideal to which we can still aspire. The book connects the dots between statistics, public policy problems, and people's experiences. Better understanding of the attributes of marriage allows each one of us to invest deeper meaning into our relationships, as well as enhancing and creating stronger communities. The authors equip readers with the language and logic of marriage using secular research, but by imagining that marriage still matters, we can learn to properly support and nurture marriage for the good of the world. Absolutely so important, such an important message, not just because I was reflecting on this as recently celebrating a wedding anniversary, but there's some really shocking data out there on Canada. I mean, if you just look at the plummeting birth rate alone, I think the last time I checked, Canada's birth rate is now 1.3. 1.3. Keep in mind that replacement is 2.1. So we're almost at half the rate that we would need to maintain the birth rate of our society, to maintain our population, which really just means that each generation is half the size of the previous one. Each generation is half the size of the previous one, and that the population, naturally, if it weren't for immigration, would be cut in half every 100 years. So really, I mean, we need to do everything we can to try to encourage people, Canadians, to have more children. Canadians, marriage is just one of the ways that we can do it. I think there's a lot of other public policy ideas that have been floated and can work to various extents. But really, it comes down to a much more fundamental problem, which is that people just don't believe in the future. They don't have the optimism. They don't believe that the world is heading in the right direction, and they don't want to have kids. And that's very alarming. So I think everything that we can do to try to encourage people that it's still worth doing. It's still worth in taking on these kinds of responsibilities can lead to just so much happiness and joy. So I won't go on too much. I'll leave it at that. But I do recommend that everyone pick up a copy of this wonderful book. And I'm hoping to have the authors on the podcast in the future to go into more detail on it. All right, folks, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day. I'm Candice Malcolm. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless.